This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstag, our managing director, and Jenna Forstrom, our community manager. This week, we're talking about how to find your voice in a job interview. Our show is brought to you by Hack the Hidden Job Market, the new online course now available from Mac's List. As many as 8 out of 10 job openings never get advertised. Is your dream job one of them? Learn how to uncover hidden jobs and get noticed by the hiring managers who fill them. Get started at maxlist.org/course. Do you have a job interview coming up? Congratulations. The time and effort you've put into your search is paying off. Your next step is to prepare for the interview. You need a plan for what you will do and say in the meeting. Our guest expert this week is Caroline Dowd-Higgins. She says the way to stand out in a job interview is to find your own voice. Later in the show, Caroline offers her advice on how you can present yourself in compelling and unique ways. Many interviewers now use behavioral questions. In a moment, Ben Forstag will explain why this is so and share a list of 75 common behavioral interview questions. How can you persuade your employer to pay for your continuing education? That's our question this week. It comes from listener Catherine Moore. Jenna Forstrom has her advice. But first, as always, let's check in with the Mac's List team. Jenna, Ben, I'm curious, how have you two prepared for interviews in the past in a way that has made you stand out and look unique?
So I've got some boring, probably pretty mundane suggestions that I've done in the past. One is just like super prepare with research. And I always like to have like 2 or 3 pages of written notes down that I can pull from. And I'm not afraid to like actually pull out the notepad and flip through notes while I'm talking to the interviewer. The other thing is I like to wear something that's professional looking, obviously, but also that stands out a little bit. So instead of wearing like the dark suit, dark tie, I'll wear like a brighter tie, or if I can get away with it, like a pink shirt or something like that.
Those are good tips. And
I just think the clothes just help you stand out a little bit, and it's the kind of thing that if you can pull it off, do it.
Well, I think those are good tips, Ben.
Yeah, and I think with the clothing thing, I mean, it's obviously a pretty small thing. You're never going to get a job based on your clothing, but it helps you stand out a little bit visually. And I think, if you can pull off a bow tie or a pink shirt or something like that, it helps you get remembered. Yeah,
I think the key is to choose clothing that makes you feel comfortable so you can do your best. Jenna, tell us about your experiences.
I always research who I'm meeting with on LinkedIn to see if we have any shared connections. And so when you're meeting with them and you're talking to them, you can kind of casually mention like, oh, I saw on LinkedIn, Mac, how did you guys meet? And then that gives the opportunity to like learn a little bit more about them if it's like a personal connection or a professional connection. And then it kind of shows that you've done your research, but then also you build some more trust, I've learned.
I like that idea, Jenna, and there's a theme here. Both you and Ben are talking about the importance not only of doing your research and your homework, but showing in the conversation that you've done it and sharing what you've learned. And my tip is the same, along the same lines. I remember when I interviewed for a job, it was 25 years ago, I did research online about the employer I was meeting with, and at that time there was no internet. There was you actually had to pay a fair amount of money to get articles that existed online, and this was a cross-country job search. And I spent several $100 pulling articles about this employer, and I brought that stack of articles into the meeting, and the person's eyes just lit up because they couldn't believe that, one, I'd done it, and then we had a great conversation about the issues that were identified in those stores. I was interviewing for a communications job. So not only do the homework, but show your work, I think is the theme I'm hearing here. And a lot of people don't do that. Well, good. Well, let's turn to you, Ben. Speaking of research, and you're out there every week poking around the nooks and crannies of the internet, looking for tools and books and websites and other things that our listeners can use in their job search and career. What have you uncovered this week?
So this week I want to share a blog post I found on the Recruit Loop blog. That's recruitloop.com. And it's called 75 Behavioral Interview Questions to Select the Best Candidate. So for those of you who aren't aware of what behavioral interview questions are, these are hypothetical and experience-based questions that draw on your past work experience or your past volunteer experience or just in general your past experience. And what the interviewer is trying to do here is they're trying to figure out how you'll react in the future based on what you've done in the past. And so I think most of us have heard these at some point in time. We might not have known they were called behavioral interview questions, but they're the kind of questions to start with. Can you tell me about a time that ... So this is a blog post with 75 of the most common behavioral interview questions, and I pulled out 3 that I thought were particularly good. So the first one is, tell me about a situation in which you've had to adjust to changes over which you had no control, and how did you handle it? That's good. Right? Because sometimes we get so caught up in like thinking we're the drivers of what we're doing in our careers, but oftentimes we're not, and being able to manage around that.
Yeah, there's so much that we don't control.
Exactly. 2, give me an example of a time you discovered an error that had been overlooked by a colleague. What did you do? What was the outcome?
I like this one because it gives you an opportunity to show how you would respond to people making a mistake. Mm-hmm. And I think how you handle that speaks volumes about not only your character, but how you work with others in the workplace.
Absolutely. And, this is one of these things that always happens. I mean, you're always going to work with people, and people are humans, and they make errors and mistakes and things, and how you help them with that and adjust and overcome and fix things. That's huge. And the third one I thought was really good is when have you ever gone out on a limb to defend a customer? What happened? And I just really love that question because it's so customer service oriented, which is great. So the reason I like this particular list, and there's a lot of lists of questions out on the internet. If you type in behavioral interview questions, you'll get like 10,000 hits. But I like this one because this blog is actually for recruiters. So these are the questions that recruiters are telling each other that they should be asking, which is a good indicator that they might show up on some future interview you're sitting in on. So, it's this whole idea of know thy enemy. Not that the employer is your enemy, but I think it's a good idea to figure out the kind of questions that recruiters are thinking about and challenging each other to ask.
So it's kind of like getting an advanced copy of the final exam.
Kind of, yes, where there's like 10,000 questions and they're only going to ask 5. So it's a little bit of a challenge. But, if you could go through these and like come up in your head just with some like short answers for the 75 questions, you're going to be set. And mostly the process of answering these things, there's a method, which we'll talk about in a future episode, I think. They call it the STAR method, and you can Google that if you can't wait. But, you get into a routine of how to answer these, and they get easier and easier the more you practice. So before I wrap up, I just want to ask Mac and Jenna, do you have any favorite behavioral interview questions you've either had in an interview or just have heard of elsewhere?
Yeah, I, along with the Max List team, have been working on Hack the Hidden Job Market course. And one of my assignments is I'm coming up with 100 informational interview questions, which is going to be a bonus download for anyone who signs up for the course. And one of the questions I really liked while I was doing all this research of thousands of lists, that's an exaggeration, like a dozen lists of interview questions was, tell us about a time you didn't agree with your boss's decision and how did you handle that? And I thought that was really interesting.
We've never had that situation in our office.
Never.
That kind of sounds like 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m. And it's only 1:30 when we're recording this.
We just arm wrestle, right?
Right. Yeah. Best 2 out of 3 decides the question.
Any from you, Mac?
Well, for me, I like to think about actual problems I have in the workplace when I'm talking to a candidate and share those with people and ask them how they've confronted or dealt with issues like that in the past. And I like that for 2 reasons. One, it gives people an opportunity to talk about their experience and their approach. And two, it gives me a glimpse into how they might approach that problem if we do have the opportunity to work together.
Yeah, I love that because I think sometimes in interviews people can get like way too hypothetical with situations, and they might be realistic in some sense, but they're not grounded in any actual experience in the office right then. And so I don't think the employer is getting what they're looking for at the end of the day, and the candidate is they don't have any context to answer that question. So saying like, here in this organization, here's one of our challenges. How have you approached this challenge in the past is great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ben. And if you have a suggestion for Ben, please write him and we may share your idea on the show. Ben's address is easy to remember. It's ben@maxlist.org. Now let's turn to you, our listeners. Jenna Forstrom, our community manager, is here, and she joins us to answer one of your questions. Jenna, what do you have in the Max List mailbag this week?
Today's question comes from Catherine Moore, and she asked,
Hi, my name is Catherine. I was just calling because I'm in a specialized health field, and I was wondering what employer to pay for my continuing education is so that I can stay up and current on my certification. Thanks.
Hey, Catherine, thank you so much for calling in and asking your question. I think this is a great question because I think in some career fields like healthcare and teachers and education, you have to continue your ed to stay certified. So if your employer hasn't offered to pay for it, I think reaching out and sending an email to like HR or your manager and say, hey, my certs are coming up. I found a course online. I think it's really focused on what we're doing. What is the reimbursement process? So kind of just trigger the conversation, because I think for most companies that hire people with specialized fields where it's required to continue, they'll pay for it. Now, the flip side is I come from marketing, so there's no continuing ed. But I think inviting your manager in and say, hey, I really want to learn about this. I've been noticing it's taking up a lot more of my time. And I think if I took an online course or took a class that I've already done this research, it would be really beneficial not only to me, but our team and our productivity, and just inviting them into the conversation and seeing what opportunities are out there. I did something like this when I was at Standard Insurance. I really wanted to go to South by Southwest Interactive because we were building an online platform, and Standard's a very conservative company, and South by Southwest is kind of known for music and like fun stuff. And so they were kind of really apprehensive. So the deal I worked out with them was I was going to go pay my way, but I wasn't going to take any vacation time or sick time. So I was like working remotely to learn. And then I sent this huge recap to the entire team of everything I learned and how it applied to what we were doing. And the next year Standard funded me to go, which was like pretty awesome. So just being flexible and working with your management team. Mac and Ben, do you guys have any tips?
I think the key is just always try to tie it back into what would be good for the organization as well. And so, if you're in marketing and you need to polish up your Photoshop skills, for example, there's a clear tie-in there where you being a better Photoshop artist is going to help you do your job as a marketer, and the organization will benefit that way. It's a little bit tougher when, you're looking to get some training in something that's outside of your professional skill set, your existing professional skill set. So if you're a marketer but you want to go to nursing school, you're probably not going to get your employer to pay for nursing school there because it's outside of their professional needs.
But maybe a CPR class.
Maybe a CPR class.
Well, I think you both nailed it here. I think you can make a compelling case when you can show the benefits to the employer and to the work team of attending a class or a conference or whatever the educational opportunity might be. And when employers see those benefits and you can demonstrate that it's good for the bottom line and it's good for your teammates, that you're going to save time and money in the long run by learning these skills or having these opportunities, that's going to I think that's the most persuasive case of all. Well, thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Ben and Catherine. And if you have a question for Jenna, she would love to hear from you. Her email address is jenna@maxlist.org. Or call our listener line. That number is area code 716-JOB-TALK. Again, that's 716-562-8225. If we use your question on the show, you'll receive a free copy of our new book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere, that we're publishing on February 1st, 2017. Now, these segments with Jenna and Ben are sponsored by Hack the Hidden Job Market, the new online course from MaxList. As many as 80% of all jobs never get posted. Instead, employers fill these openings by word of mouth. Our new course shows you how this hidden job market works. We teach you how to find plum gigs that never appear on a job board, how to stand out online in a crowd of applicants, and how to connect with insiders who can help your career. In each of the course's 12 modules, you get the tools and tips you need to get the work you want. Meaningful work, work that makes a difference, work that you can love. Hack the Hidden Job Market is live now. Register at www.maxlist.org/course. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Caroline Dowd-Higgins is Executive Director of Career and Professional Development for the Indiana University Alumni Association. She's the author of the book, This Is Not the Career I Ordered, and Caroline also hosts the podcasts Your Working Life and the online video series Thrive. And she's a regular contributor to the Huffington Post, Elevate Women's Network, The Rouse, and the Chronicle newspaper. Caroline joins us today from Bloomington, Indiana. Caroline, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mac. I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Now, this week, Caroline, as you know, we're talking about how to find your own voice in a job interview. Tell us, Caroline, why is this important? How can this make a difference, not only in a job interview, but in getting an offer?
Well, I'll tell you, there are so many qualified and highly credentialed candidates out there. And the first phase, it's a very level playing field. Everyone is submitting materials via resumes, cover letters, portfolios, whatever backup information you can have to endorse your candidacy. But when you get to the stage of having an interview, whether it's in person or by phone, you're really talking about culture fit and how you can solve the problems of the organization. It's literally the first time they can hear your human voice, and it is an impactful introduction into why you could be a great fit for that organization.
So knowing how important it is, what are some of your tips, Caroline, about what people should say in these conversations and how they should prepare?
You know, preparation is the most important thing. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's a step that is often skipped. I work with a lot of clients who have been in the job market for years, quite often decades, and they find themselves downsized because of a merger or an acquisition. And all of a sudden, they've got to go back to the basics of interviewing. And quite often, they will skip that step of research. So no matter where you are in your career journey, research is imperative. So for example, take that job description, and I often print it out and pull out my highlighters and underline the specific things in the job description that relate to my strengths and my competencies and the types of tasks the organization is looking for. So I can address those with stories and examples and compelling illustrations of why I believe that I would be a good fit. You want to use the psychology of the job description to help them understand why you'd be a great fit. So the roadmap is there for you. Use it. And that roadmap is the job description.
So a lot of people, I think, walk into the interview rooms, Caroline, and they come prepared to answer questions, but they don't do that preparation. You've talked about the importance of the psychology of the job description. I've also seen seen blog posts you've written about the importance of talking about the return on investment a candidate can offer a company. Tell us more about that.
Yes. It's really all about solving their problems. Companies hire people to fill a need. They have a set of job responsibilities, of tasks, and quite often they correspond with challenges or particular functions in the organization. So you need to come to that interview prepared with examples that are relatable to what you will be doing. And if you don't have that experience yet, that's okay, but you need to be able to highlight and focus on transferable skills that show your potential. And I can't stress enough the importance of storytelling. There's nothing worse than that rote answer that just feels like it's the stock answer that you could use for any interview. You really want to have a conversation and tell stories so it feels natural and authentic. Because another part of the interview that's imperative is the culture fit. Are you the right person for this organization? Are you the right fit for our team?
What do you see people do in interviews that demonstrates that it's a good cultural fit, that the chemistry is right? What can people do not only to prepare for that, but to demonstrate it in the interview?
Well, I think that there is a fear often on the part of the candidate that they can't reach out to learn more about the job once that interview is scheduled. And I couldn't disagree more. It's perfectly fine for you to conduct some informational interviews. You can't go into details about the job description. It can't be a formal job interview, but you can query some of the people that work on the team or even some tangential members in the department or the company at large to get a sense for what the organization is all about. There are some great websites out there like Glassdoor, payscale.com that have reviews from current and former employers. So do your due diligence. Find out what the scoop is on the street from people who may have worked in that organization so you go in with your eyes open. And when you're asking questions, and that's an important responsibility for the interview candidate, ask about the culture. What keeps you here? What would encourage you to move on? What do you love about your job? What keeps you up at night? Those are really indicative of a culture.
I want to talk more about the importance of asking questions, but let's pause for a second, because I do hear from job seekers who say, gosh, I did all the homework, I collected all the facts and information, but in the end, I was told it wasn't, the chemistry wasn't right. And people who tell me that feel very frustrated because chemistry feels like this invisible thing that you can't quite grasp. What would you say to job seekers like that who've been told, well, gosh, the chemistry wasn't there, or it was better with another candidate?
Right.
How can people react to that, and how can they learn from that experience so they can prepare for the next interview?
I agree. Chemistry is very subjective. So, you might have felt, wow, this is a great fit. I really bonded. I felt authentic with this prospective group of future colleagues. But if they didn't feel the same, the sad reality and the balance of it is it's their decision, not yours, right? You're applying for the job. You are the candidate. But I think it's also important to trust that they know what their work life is like. They know the kind of work family that they have created. And I use that term a bit tongue-in-cheek, but let's face it, in the career world today, we spend a lot of time with our work family, quite often more time with our colleagues than we do with our actual family. So that fit is tremendously important. What I would say to the job seeker and the candidate who's in the interview chair, be yourself. Certainly, you want to be professional and appropriate at all times, but be yourself. If you bring levity and a sense of humor to the table, be authentic with that. Be appropriate, but show the real you so they can enjoy you for who you are. Because if you go in acting like someone that you're not, then it will be a negative surprise for both parties once you are in the job saddle.
I think that's a hard message to hear about chemistry, but I think your advice is spot on, Caroline, that when you are yourself, your authentic self in an interview, and if it's still not a good fit, that's actually, it's hard to get the bad news in the short run, but in the long run, it's probably a good thing.
I agree. And I would just add to that briefly, Mac, that it's not as if you did something wrong. It's just that the pair of shoes didn't fit. And you just have to trust that there is a great fit out there for you, and you will find it. So you just need to keep being real and being yourself.
Now, a moment ago, you talked about the importance of not only coming in with questions, but kind of taking control of questions and not being afraid to ask questions of people, whether it's on an interview panel or in a one-on-one conversation. What would you say, Caroline, to people who kind of feel awkward doing that?
Well, I'll tell you, there are some amazing professionals out there who ask wonderful interview questions of their candidates. And then there are others who don't. It doesn't mean that they're not terrific professionals, but perhaps they don't have the training or the wherewithal to know what to ask. So I see this as a hazard for the candidate, and I like to use this metaphor. Take the wheel and drive the interview car. If at the end of the 45-hour-minute interview, you feel like, gosh, they just didn't get to the core of why I'd be a good fit, or they didn't ask me some juicy questions, or I could illustrate my return on investment, I would take the car and say, before we leave, I really want you to know why I believe I would be a good fit. And then you can share what I call your closing remarks. If you leave feeling like you didn't make your case, it shouldn't be because you didn't try. You really need to have the confidence to be able to interject when those great questions are not asked.
Now, you talked about the importance of telling a compelling story or using stories throughout the course of the interview. Share with us, Caroline, some of your best storytelling tips.
Yeah, I want to preface this by saying practice. It's hard to be completely off the cuff and impromptu. So if there are a set of skills or competencies or even work tasks in the job description that you want to speak to, think in advance, perhaps write them out, and then practice with someone you trust so you can get in the groove of telling that story. If they ask for extreme time management experience, tell a story about how you are an efficient time manager and how you can prove that by sharing an example. If you need competencies in Excel or advanced software programming that is unique to the company and you don't have that specific experience, talk about something relatable that might show your complex ability to handle technology. And again, the more specific you can be, and it might even be, I'd like to tell you a story about my advanced Excel experience and why that's relatable to your CRM software program in this organization. Set them up. I often talk about when you tell a story to a young child, perhaps you're reading to them, their whole posture changes when you lead in with, I'd like to tell you a story. You can use that same psychology in an interview.
And I like your point about practice. If we have an important presentation at work, or we're speaking at an event, I don't think any of us would go into that meeting or to that event without practicing and rehearsing our remarks. And while you don't want to over prepare for an interview, practicing with someone or even better, videotaping yourself and going back and watching it, I think, can really pay dividends.
I agree, Mac. And the body language, the opportunity to watch yourself and really hear yourself in a critical way so you can improve is so valuable. And body language speaks volumes. So that is a very important reason to use a video example if you possibly can when you're practicing.
So we've talked about preparation and how you should get ready for these interviews and what you might say during the course of the interview. Let's talk, Caroline, about how you say it. Tell us how people should manage their voice in an interview.
I believe that volume exudes confidence. Now, I don't want you to shout at your interview team, but if they're straining to hear you, they will perceive that you are not confident in what you're sharing. It's human nature. So you might need to ramp up your volume a little bit. Eye contact is extremely important and also shows your self-confidence. When you are in a group interview and you are one person as the interview candidate and you're speaking to a panel of people that are interviewing you, really open up your body language so you are speaking to all of them and give them a few seconds of eye contact. That, in combination with your vocal confidence, speaks volumes about your success in the interview.
What about filler words? I know it's hard to avoid them, but expressions like and you know, what's your advice about that?
I do a lot of communication coaching. I do a lot of public speaking myself, and those are human traps that we all fall into, myself included, especially when we get nervous. So the number one thing that any interview candidate needs to remember is listen to yourself as well as the people with whom you're speaking, and try to self-audit when you hear yourself default to those filler words, such as like, you know. I'll take that a step farther, Mac, and say we also add some what I will call disqualifiers. And those are sort of, kind of, pretty much. And those lessen the intensity of the words that we're speaking. I get it. We all do it. It's our default mechanism. But anyone in an interview scenario needs to be keenly aware of what's coming out of their mouth so they can adjust accordingly.
Excellent advice. Well, Caroline, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, tell us what's next for you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you for asking. You know, I've got so many things cooking, Mac. I've got a book that I hope will be coming out in 2017 called Thrive Where You Are. I do a lot of work with coaching clients about career reinvention. And I have been working with employers lately who have said, gosh, we don't want to lose our top talent. So I'm co-authoring this book with an amazing colleague by the name of Dr. Nancy Hutchins, and we are on a mission to help people understand that they can actually reinvent in their current organization. So you need not leave your organization to be able to reinvent your career. And of course, one of my great passions is public speaking. So it's such a great joy to be talking all over the world to audiences who are passionate about career development.
Well, that's very exciting, and we'll be sure to include links in the show notes to your book and other resources. And I know people can find you on the web at CarolineDowd-Higgins.com, and that URL will be in the show notes as well. Well, Caroline, thanks for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure, Mac. Thank you.
We're back in the Max List studio with Jenna and Ben. So tell me, you two, what are some important points you heard Caroline make?
I really liked her suggestion that you should take the wheel and drive the car if you don't get the questions that you think really make you shine as the person who's the right fit for the organization. So like if the employer is not asking you the kind of questions that really let you show your expertise, whenever you can, kind of pivot and start finding other ways to show why you're the best candidate for the job. I think that's really good because I think she's absolutely right. A lot of employers, they don't really know the right questions to ask, or they've got a list that they've gotten from online or from their HR department or wherever, and they're trying their best. But if there's some other way that you can position yourself, go for it.
I really liked her comment about going through the job description and marking up where your strengths lie. And then kind of, I feel like the converse of that would be like, be aware of where you're limited or you've got more weaknesses. And just always like when you go into the interview, like these are the 3 things on the job description that I could crush. Like I'm an expert on, I know how to do. And then when the question of, what's a weakness? You can say like, oh, I saw in your job description, like I'll use Max List. They talked about podcasting. And I said in my interview, I've never done a podcast. Like I just owned up to it as but I'm super eager to learn and just using that story. And then the second thing I liked about her talk was how she used stories to help engage. Like how I just shared a story about Max List. Ta-da.
Well done. I think that Caroline would give you a gold star, Jenna, and I'm sure she would if she's listening now. And Ben, I like your point about the interview being a conversation and not being afraid to ask questions, because I think many people walk into the interview room and they think it's something to be endured, and their job is simply to answer questions and then wait to be picked. And you really do need to come in with your own questions. I think Caroline made that point very clear, and the benefits to you when you do that. Well, thank you both, and thank you for listening to today's episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In each issue, we give you the key points of that week's show. We also include links to all the resources mentioned, and you get a transcript of the full episode. If you subscribe to the newsletter now, we'll send you our job seeker checklist. In one easy-to-use file, we show you all the steps you need to take to find a great job. Get your free newsletter and checklist today. Go to maxlist.org/podcast. Join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Rob Walker. He'll explain when it's time to move on and find a new job. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.